The smartest thing I've ever seen someone pull, and why it terrified me. My dad. He knows so much esoteric and absolutely off-the-wall, strange knowledge that you sometimes have to question how and why he knows it. One day, while him and I were shooting the breeze about a job he had before I was born, he casually started talking in detail about the processes and ingredients needed to weaponize anthrax as an aerosolized dust. I knew a lady who counted pills in a pharmacy basically her entire life. One time she looked at a container of ibuprofen that was supposed to have 100 pills in it and said it looked off. She recounted and it had 99 pills in it. One fewer. My mind was blown. Imagine all of the jelly bean contests you could win. When I was 12, my parents were fighting a lot and we were incredibly poor among other issues. I would cope by riding my bike up and down the road while whispering my frustrations to myself in an hour-long vent. The downside is everyone probably thought I was crazy. The plus side is I was in great shape. I was doing this one afternoon when I saw an old man whispering to himself by his mailbox. He was very careful to make eye contact with me, and he made sure his whispering was noticed. It was all very deliberate. I thought he was making fun of me, so I pulled over to chat with him. Nobody really paid me any attention back then, good or bad, and this old man asked me why I performed my daily ritual. I gave him a vague answer like, trouble at home. And he asked a few mundane questions like, where would you like to move when you're older? Do you have any siblings? And from a few questions, he sized me up immediately and knew basically everything about me. He even deducted that I was gay, which nobody knew. At the end of it all, he gave me very sage advice and recommended I find a creative outlet. I'm an artist to this day. The strange part is I never saw him again, and nobody at that house recognized him when I described him to them. It's gonna blow your mind when you finally get the opportunity to time travel back to have that conversation with yourself. I once watched my cousin with Down syndrome just start hitting golf balls at the range like he was the course pro. He went to a few of my matches growing up, and occasionally I'd take him to the range with me, because he loved watching me hit them and riding the cart if I played. One day he was messing with one of my wedges and I offered him a couple of balls. By no means was he sending these hundreds of yards, considering it's a pitching wedge, but every shot was practically identical to the one before. He was consistently hitting them 80 yards within what seemed like a 5-yard grouping. Since then I've tried to get him to hit more balls, but he just doesn't want to. By far the most unexpected thing I've witnessed. I mean, from what little I know about golf, that would make him like a top-tier player, right? Consistency and being able to accurately call your shots is like a superpower. I just whack and pray on the few occasions where I've done it. Also, most of the answers people are giving aren't creepy like the question prompted. Cool stories anyway, though. I had to learn collegiate-level German in the military, which was a 9-month class. We started off with 15 people and graduated with 6. It was really hard and I barely made it through. The top kid in my class was basically a white kid from Indiana who'd already tested out with top scores in Spanish and Portuguese in a matter of weeks. He not only knew these languages perfectly fluently, he could switch dialects fluently between like the DR and Spain or Brazil and Portugal. His story was that the schools were scheduled for a specific length of time, with a report date already set that was kind of far out. So the Defense Language Institute, our school, kept throwing languages at him. He figured that out and started taking his time in class, but like halfway through German, he turned in a science fiction book that he'd written to our teachers completely in the German language. Then they put him in Arabic, then Farsi, which were each 1.5-year-long schools on their own. So in the 9 months I was there to learn how to read, write, and speak German, which already had an expected high failure rate, he did the same for Spanish, Portuguese, German, Arabic, and Farsi, including different dialects, accents, and he wrote a couple of books. Before he came, he said he knew some Spanish from working construction after high school and liked the idea of becoming a linguist, but had never actually tried learning before. Besides languages, he seemed extremely normal, but nobody knew he was writing books. We already had like 4 hours of homework every night. It was insane. I'll add that we were friends, and I asked him his method. He said his favorite way to learn was to take songs he knew in English and then translate them into the new language. The trick was, he wouldn't translate it word for word. He'd learn about the people and say the lyrics how they would say it. How he figured that out, I have no idea. Not creepy, but my high school algebra teacher apparently had the textbook memorized. We were doing work in class by ourselves and struggling with a problem. What page and what problem? He'd ask. He'd then proceed to write the problem out on the board without referencing the book. It blew our high school minds away. My math teacher was like that. I had him his last 2 years of his 45-year-long career. He had been teaching math for so long that there was no need for him to do any sort of lesson planning. He never had any notes or anything because he had countless examples in his head. He was a great teacher and a great guy. I knew a guy who worked retail and was able to memorize customer credit card numbers. He used them to buy naughty movies and magazines. When I was in med school, I was tangentially friends with a guy who never showed up to university at all. Skipped all lectures, called in sick for all lab and tutorial sessions. The night before second-year finals, he was around my house and said he'd spent the last week watching every lecture at double speed. The guy placed top 10 out of 300 students in every exam. But mind you, it wasn't just that he remembered everything, but he had a functional, lateral, applicable knowledge of all the stuff we had to know, much better than most people who actually showed up. I always shuddered to think that if he applied himself, he'd be a monster of a man. But the guy was content to just chill. I went to university with someone like that. Everyone thought he was a bit of a jerk. He was actually just really intelligent, so I think much of life just kind of bored him. He needed the stimulation. I actually got on with him just fine. The two things I remember, first was his insane ability at pool. He could just figure out angles for multiple balls and bounces and had the skill to hit the shot to cause what he could forecast. Secondly, 1 week before our end-of-year exams, he confessed that he'd been to about 5 lectures that year and had never really read any of the books or materials. He just said, I suppose I'd better read some. He then spent a week in his room reading. He passed with the equivalent of a first. No idea what happened to him. I knew a guy who could remember everything he'd ever read, but that's not the creepy part. The creepy part was how he wouldn't tell you. So he didn't like telling people because it became a game for people. What's the 5th word of the 2nd paragraph on page 93 of the book? Stuff like that. So anyway, anyone knew he just wouldn't tell them. Fair. Up until they teed him off. And then it was like a court drama. On January 16th, 2007, you said that John and Jane were seen flirting at the coffee shop, and said, quote, "Oh my god, John is cheating on Mary with Jane again." I'd look through past messages and sure as heck the message would say that. Anyway, the guy was super smart but really jaded and depressed. Fell out of touch, so I don't know what he's doing now. A lot of people with really good memories get depressed. There's a really good reason why we forget things. I'm not saying it was creepy, but my late friend Bruce could just learn anything on a whim. Languages, history, technology, you name it. He had been running science fiction conventions for 21 years, and when he stopped he said, "I'm going to become a CCIE. I heard they make a lot of money." Now, the CCIE certification is frickin' hard. Normally it takes many years, thousands of dollars in courses, step programs, test exams, and then usually you have to fly out to somewhere to take the exam. He just got some used books, and got a CCNA, then a CCNP, then a CCSI within about 6 to 8 months. Out of knowing nothing about Cisco or modern computer networking, he just ended up becoming a Cisco certified instructor in less than a year, then went on to get a CCIE. I believe, like most people, he failed the first time, but he passed the second time, from 0 to CCIE in 18 months. Companies paid top dollar for him. Some paid just to have him on their letterhead. His entire life was like that, by the way. I was once helping my friend's mum run the daycare and I was reading to a 9-month-old, and I noticed every time I read an item on the page, for example, the frog jumped, she'd point at the frog. I eventually started making it harder and asking her where the ball is. It was on another page. She'd reach over, turn the page back and show me the ball. I was pretty impressed, but I have no clue on development stages. That is a little earlier than expected, to be honest. It's hard to gauge what else kids could do, though. Also, good luck to the parents raising a smart kid. Those things are a lot more trouble than the sweet little dummies. I used to go to school with a genius dude. He was super shy and introverted, but his ability to solve complex issues had everyone asking for his help. And he eventually became a super quiet leader in our classroom. He'd correct teachers left and right, score perfect grades while everyone else was struggling, photocopy his extremely clean notebook for everyone to use, solve the tests multiple times in multiple variations with errors, and passed it along the class for everyone to copy. Did a few people's final project for a fee in addition to his own. He carried us all through the toughest classes, all while staying extremely humble about his intellectual skills. Finished every semester with near-perfect grades. We all looked up to him. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? I worked at a psych hospital about 10 years ago. I floated, so I worked on all of the units wherever they were short-staffed. For a couple of weeks, I was pulled to the adolescent unit. There was a 12-year-old boy, let's call him Joe. He was brought in from another residential center. At this other residential center, Joe was a ringleader of boys about 10 through 13 who would attack others who were also at the center. Joe knew the schedule of the staff and their rotation. He knew the diligent staff members and the not-so-diligent ones, so he'd plan their attacks. Joe was the only patient that truly frightened me due to his intelligence and clear lack of remorse, and even seemed to enjoy other people's pain. When I observed him, he'd do little things such as make a certain noise that he knew would set off another child there. He was good at making friends with the other kids and charming them. At one point, they did a search of his room and found a bunch of other staff's schedules in there. I'm waiting to hear a story of him being a serial murderer or unspeakable act offender now that he's in his 20s. Intelligence gone horribly wrong. A friend of mine had been involved with a guy she worked with who turned out to be married with a young child. The friend was particularly vulnerable as she had just gotten out of a really problematic relationship and had zero concept of what having appropriate boundaries looked like. This guy started to mess her around and string her along while subtly eroding the bit of little self-worth she had scraped up since her divorce. Then he started milking her financially. Obviously, he didn't leave his wife when he did all of this. Enter our uni friend. She told our friend exactly what to say and how to react when her manipulator says this and does that. She was absolutely spot on with the things she predicted he'd say and do, and the responses and reactions were designed, as she put it, to give him a taste of his own medicine. Except his was the equivalent to prescribing Vicks while she dosed him with cyanide, metaphorically speaking, obviously. Within 48 hours of her following instructions and with no prior history of issues, he had gone AWOL from work and was finally found in the local hospital where he was on involuntary hold after emergency services found him attempting incredibly dangerous things. Uni friend had never met this man, but she predicted everything he'd do correctly and also knew exactly what things would do the most damage to him psychologically in the shortest possible time frame. I often wonder whether she's a psychopath herself or just incredibly good at reading people. I worked with someone briefly when I worked for the police. He came to my team to get frontline experiences for promotion. He had been in a secretive investigation unit before coming to us. I'll call him Dave. We went into this area with loads of gang-on-gang violence, and we were enforcing a Section 60 stop for weapons after a nasty murder in the area. We stopped two men at the side of the street, and it was immediately obvious they had nothing to do with any of it. We chatted for a bit, and that was it. Or so I thought. Dave, being incredibly polite and friendly, said to one of the men, "I think I know you." The man said that he didn't. He had never been in any trouble with the police, never been arrested, never gets in any bother whatsoever. He was in his 30s, this fella. Dave said, "I do know you. Let me have a look at you." The man was good-natured about it, even though I was feeling bloody awkward. "I've never been in any trouble," said the man. Dave looked at him and said, "Oh, I believe you haven't. Your dad did, though." He calls the man by his name, his date of birth, his old address, his mum's name and date of birth, and his dad's details too. Dave says that 22 years previously, he had attended at the bloke's house when he was a preteen because his parents were arguing and his dad was drunk. His dad was arrested for a minor sleep-it-off breach of the peace. He wasn't a regular criminal or anything like that. Dave had not only recognized the guy, but he had done it from when he was a child, aged him, and remembered every bloody detail for a minor thing over 20 years previous. No wonder he was in the high-end investigation units. Genius! Imagine how horrifying that is from the other end, though. Stopped by a random police officer who insists he knows you, lists off every private detail that he knows and also your dad's criminal history, and then leaves. If it were me, I'd be convinced the police were watching me. Shortly before my ex-wife and I separated, she stated that she had run all of my friends and family away from me intentionally over the years. Not because she hated them, but because if the day came where she decided to kill me, she'd have time to dispose of my body and leave the country before or if they noticed I was missing. By that point, I hadn't talked to any of my friends or family for almost a year and a half, so they wouldn't have known for a good while, thinking I was still ignoring them because of her. We've been divorced for 3 years. I have full custody of our 3 girls, and she's currently in a mental health facility. Obviously, I didn't know it in the dating stages. but she had a mental illness and was diagnosed professionally with schizophrenia about 2 years before our divorce. I don't blame her for all of her actions or anything. I knew she was a sweet, kind-hearted person when we met, but her mental health declined rapidly after having each kid. The postpartum depression really ramped it up, and it just became too much for her. We did divorce, and I did get full custody of our daughters. Not creepy, but I knew a 14-year-old who was helping his dad drywall a home. The kid looked at the shape of a staircase, looked at the drywall on the horses ready to cut, looked back at the staircase, and then cut the drywall without a single measurement or marking. The drywall fit the staircase so perfectly it slid into place like it was snuggling the stairs. Not a single measurement. I have the opposite of whatever you call this kid's talent. I can measure 3 or 4 times, rule an outline and guideline on something, and still cut it incredibly wonky and wrong. Yay! I think just the first time I witnessed someone with a special interest in life. I was a school assistant and had been asked to walk around the school with a specific 13-year-old kid who needed a 10-minute stress relief break. It was a school for kids with anxiety and depression. Anyway, we're walking and a plane goes by overhead, pretty low to the ground. In a super casual tone of voice, that kid starts telling me the heading of the plane, which airport it came out of based on how low it was, and its probable flight number and destination. I was like, woof. We had a special needs student in my elementary school who had poor grades in everything but geography. The kid could name every country, identify every flag, and you could name any place and he could accurately tell you what the weather was like there at the current time on any given day. A friend once showed me his guidebook on how to handle his girlfriend. He had taken notes on her likes and dislikes, what he'd given her, and precisely how she had responded, which actions caused which responses, what phrases he could quote at her to yield particular responses, and then sort of used the information he'd collected to write a little guide to expect outcomes of various things he does, so that he could diffuse her if she got mad at him. If she felt unloved, he had strategies for fixing the situation, so he could go back to doing whatever he liked while she gets off his back. If X happens, then Y will likely do Z unless P. It was somewhere between oddly sweet and creepily manipulative. Okay, turns out this quirk is fascinatingly polarizing. I've skimmed through the replies to my story, and the reference to TV show characters aside, a bunch of people are saying some variation of, "How is this even creepy? We all do this to some extent," whilst a bunch of others are saying he's a straight-up psychopath. I was a kid in the 80s, and my dad's best friend, who worked with him, came over and saw me messing around with my Commodore 64. I showed him I was working on coding it to draw a line in BASIC. This was all new, and I was excited at the time. How technology has changed. And he goes, let me make a couple of adjustments on the math, and sits down and in a few lines codes out a Mandelbrot fractal that grows and expands with overlapping fractals on my 16-color EGA monitor. This was years before I'd see something similar with Windows Line's screensaver. I know fractals are somewhat straightforward for those that know the math, but to be able to sit down out of the blue and do this in a few minutes required a level of skills and knowledge that blew me away, especially done as a one-off for a kid. It really inspired me. He was also the one that told me that the reason we haven't found extraterrestrial life is because of time, not space, like putting a person in New York and Florida and giving them 5 minutes to find each other. He spent later years consulting for Apple, basically doing what he likes working on, and now is retired and long-haired, playing bass and guitar in lounges most evenings. I used to drag race. One of my racing buddies is a mechanical engineer. We were at the track one day, pitted together with our cars, and we were discussing gear ratios and whatnot. I was running 36-inch tall rear tires, and the car was going through the traps, finish line, at about 6,200 RPM in the 1/8 mile, at 148 miles per hour. Peak power for my engine at the time was 7,100 RPM. The idea is to get the car into the 7,100 RPM range quicker and for longer periods of time, which will make the car faster on the top end, and having more gear in it means the car would leave harder too. So I'm thinking about this and said, I wonder how many times these tires rotate when the car makes a clean 1/8 of a mile pass. Within 10 seconds, he said, 70 1/4 revolutions. I was like, bro, and walked into the trailer to get my calculator. So I calculated, roll out, a 36-inch tall tire will move forward 113.04 inches on a full rotation, 36 times 3.14. Convert that to feet gives you 9.42 feet, 113.04 divided by 12 Divide the length of the track by the rollout, 660 divided by 9.42, and you get 70.06. None of this is advanced math, but this guy did it in his head in about 10 seconds. We've got apps to do this stuff nowadays, but it was an impressive thing to see happen. I had a friend from childhood who had an eidetic memory. He never forgets anything. At primary school, he had a lot of problems because he couldn't accept that people forgot stuff, and nobody had any idea that he had this ability. So if anyone got a detail wrong or something like that, he'd think that they were lying or trying to trick him and freak out. It wasn't until he was 15 or so that people realized what was going on. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all of the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.